Welcome to Canada's most irreverent talk show. This is the Andrew Lawton Show, brought to you by True North.
Coming up, Anthony Furey and I talk about all the big picture issues, media, politics, what's coming up for True North in the year ahead. Stay tuned.
The Andrew Lawton Show starts right now.
Welcome to the Andrew Lawton Show, Canada's most irreverent talk show here on True North. We're still in the midst, I think, of the holiday season more broadly, so we're taking advantage of it and taking a look at some of the bigger picture discussions that we don't often get time to do when we're chasing the horse race story of the day, the breaking news, whatever else is happening. And this episode I've actually been trying to put together for a couple of months now, and just for whatever reason, we haven't been able to do it. And a big part of it was because when this guy joined the True North team, we were in the midst of the Public Order Emergency Commission, and obviously that was dominating our coverage. But Anthony Furey, who I don't even think I can say new now, but for the last few months has been True North's VP of Editorial and Content, is with me. Anthony, an absolute pleasure to have you back on. Thanks for coming on today.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. It's great to be here with you on the show, and it's great to be here at True North. It's been a great couple of months.
Yeah, it has. And I mean, obviously you bring a wealth of experience. You and I go way back. We've had each other on each other's shows. I've written columns that you've been kind enough to publish when you were with the Toronto Sun. And I think it's actually really great that you're at True North now for a number of reasons. But I was wondering if you could just first explain, I know you've talked about it a little bit in the past, why you took the plunge to new media, to independent media.
Yeah, look, it was a great privilege to be at Post Media for 12 years. And I think that's a long time. You know, you hear all these reports that say people aren't in jobs for life anymore. Young people jump around 3 or 4 different jobs within a decade or what have you. And I thought, oh man, you know, I want to go out and do a little bit of that. I hope I can still count as a young person. So it really was about exploring different opportunities out there. And look, I think True North's growth is really impressive. I mean, I've been friends with Candace Malcolm for many years before she created True North, and I was always impressed with how every year I would be speaking with Candace or other people at True North, and just the growth is so impressive in terms of growing the audience and the reach. And it's exciting to be something that has that energy behind it, for sure. And it's no surprise that the media industry in general is moving away from more traditional models, whether it's printing physical newspapers or whether it's creating a broadcast news package exclusively to go to air on a TV station or on a radio station. I mean, increasingly, we're all sort of YouTube content creators. We find that major television stations, after they record the broadcast, have to repackage it so it can go on Instagram or go on Facebook or some other video model up to YouTube. And newspaper companies are doing that as well. So things are really converging to the point where the core product is actually the same.
I can't imagine I'm the first person to bring this up, but in some ways, I think COVID was really the great equalizer, because you had all of these media companies with their big, fancy, expensive studios, and they were forced to figure out, how to get guests in by Zoom, and they were doing everything remotely, and they were doing a lot of what independent media outlets, and certainly what I've been doing on this show for quite a while. And I think the audience sort of had adapted to that already.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting point. I mean, in past years, when I would be asked to appear on CTV or CBC, of course, you say, and please show up at this studio, and you spend time with the technicians, and you spend time in getting some basic makeup on to go on television. And it's an elaborate professional production, and that's fine. And they would not have allowed anything else. I guess if you'd said, no, I don't want to leave my house, I want to do it via Zoom, they would prefer the in-studio model, which is fine, of course. You get that studio look. And now it's almost the opposite, where that still doesn't even really happen all that much, even though COVID is behind us. When you look at the broadcasts and the panel discussions on places like CBC, it looks just like you and I talking right now. They're in their homes, or they're broadcasting from their phone or what have you. And I think that's fine. But to your point, all of those assets that they have, the physical assets, they're just kind of utilizing them less. So things have been democratized.
This was, I think, for a lot of reasons, a big year for independent media. Obviously, the Freedom Convoy, I know I keep harping on it. I know I've got a book about it. I know True North has a fantastic new book about it as well. But it was a really important moment, not just in Canadian politics and, dare I say, Canadian history, But I think in terms of exposing the problems with some of the legacy media outlets in this country, and I think that was just the number one thing that we heard from people throughout those few months at the beginning of this year, that they just didn't trust CBC to tell the story. They just didn't trust the Toronto Star to tell the story. And I think that as far as the convoy is concerned, True North did a tremendous job with that, and continuing along with all of these different stories that have come up, like the Public Order Emergency Commission. Where do we go from here? I mean, it's not every year you're going to get that gift as far as news value is concerned.
No, but to your point, what was the underlying tension or challenge with the storytelling and the narrative that happened this past years with the convoy, with the inquiry? I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that there were so many news outlets that wanted to play gatekeeper, that wanted to say, okay, we've got these people on social media, we've got the great unwashed who are trying to set the narrative one way, and we're going to tell them how they're wrong. But part of the challenge with that is the great unwashed was on the ground seeing these things happen in real time. And you've got traditional media trying to either misdirect, misinform, or just focus on things that weren't really the true narrative there. But because there was so much live streaming and so much firsthand experience going on, people said this is not accurate. And I think one of the big crises we've seen, and why we see all these surveys put on by international organizations about declining trust in traditional institutions, whatever they may be, and media lumped in there as well. Back in the 60s and the 70s, you would have that one person on the nightly news broadcast, Knowlton Nash in Canada, obviously a bit later on, it's Lloyd Robertson and Peter Mansbridge. There's a general sense that most people felt they could trust those people to tell them what is happening. And at a certain point, that trust really started to decline when people thought, can I actually rely on these sort of nightly newscast figures to tell me unvarnished what's going on? Or are they filtering it with a narrative? And I feel like people want to really hold on now to their ability as gatekeepers. But one of the things that both social media in general, and then just this whole sort of variety of other news options has shown, is that the narrative that they're actually safeguarding isn't necessarily true. And that's a big problem. If you're saying things that aren't accurate or things that are obviously pushing an agenda, that's going to see people ghost away from you. And the numbers show that that's happening.
When you talk about that institutional trust, the one thing that bothers me whenever this comes up is that the legacy media types will often bring out a lot. They'll just go right into navel gazing on this and talk about why that decline in trust is everyone else's fault. Donald Trump, I think, was probably blamed for more of the distrust in media than there was any self-blame. And obviously, when institutional trust across the board is being harmed, there isn't just one factor. But I don't think there's been, and you may have a different perspective on this, a lot of recognition by the mainstream media as far as its role in that declining trust.
Yeah, not enough. I mean, some of them are honest and they talk about it. Obviously, the whole fact that Hillary Clinton had like 107% chance of becoming president and it didn't come to pass. And they did have some honest postmortem saying, are we actually serving our country well? Are we ignoring middle America? But soon after they had that conversation, they also had something called the Trump bump, where the Washington Post, New York Times, they did really well with bringing on new subscribers, which you go, oh, really? That was happening? Because we heard subscribers were tanking in recent years. And they did get a lot because they really sort of obsessively covered the Trump White House and really kind of grilled him on absolutely everything that he did rigorously. And I don't have a problem with that per se, because I think it's important to absolutely grill our politicians, whatever their background. Now, obviously, they're not doing that with the Biden White House. There's a lot of, let's not talk about this. Let's not go there. So they've lost that energy. That energy only applied to Trump. And the subscriptions are going down again. That Trump bump is gone. And they're kind of trying to deal with what all of that means for their revenues. And that's this interesting situation they find themselves in right now.
Yeah, I must say, I think my absolute favorite was the CNN chyron of Donald Trump gets 2 scoops of ice cream when everyone else around the table gets 1 scoop of ice cream. And it's like, that was basically CNN saying, we've got nothing else to cover right now, but we know that Trump is good for ratings.
And I saw Biden actually had 2 scoops the other day when he was having lunch with Emmanuel Macron. So we got a problem here.
But did Macron get 2 or did he get 1? That is the imbalance is the real issue there.
I think he had a croissant.
Okay. Oh, that's even more. Yeah, of course he did. The interesting thing in the Canadian context is that we have our own. Now, I think there are a lot more muted than they are in the US, but we have our own sort of blank derangement syndrome phenomena that happen in the media. And right now, Polyev derangement syndrome is the flavor of the day. He had that one infamous press conference when David Aiken just decided to like use up 2 of the 5 questions he was going to take, asking why he wasn't taking more than 5 questions. And I think that these sorts of things are probably going to happen a little bit more. And I guess my question is, do you think Canada could withstand a Ron DeSantis type politician that actually actively tries to flip the script on the media? Or do you think that our political culture is just a little bit too cautious for that?
Well, it all depends. I think increasingly people are aware of, to our point about crafting narratives by certain mainstream voices, that the power that they harness is smaller and smaller when your audience is both decreasing and the people who are getting news from a plurality of sources through a variety of sources is really kind of increasing out there.
Mhm.
We're seeing that happen where there are people who just don't at all access their news from traditional outlets at all. That original idea of Donald Trump basically doing end run around the media. So yeah, I certainly think it's possible. I mean, I will note, I think you're right to say things are much more tepid here. I look back to what was happening during COVID, and you had Doug Ford, who we were told was like a Trump like figure, and he's like a right wing politician. And there was a time, of course, just this past January, it's hard to believe this was this calendar year, where he was bragging about a 4th hard lockdown. And he was actually making fun of Ron DeSantis at one press conference and making fun of Florida. So supposedly Canada's leading right-wing politician. Meanwhile, just across the border in Michigan and New York, you had Democratic politicians who weren't having it. You had the Democratic mayor of Boston, a Black lady who had said that Kim Haney was her name, to say that she doesn't believe in vaccine passports because her people had already endured slavery. That was controversial, and she sort of half apologized for that remark. But that's a remark that if a conservative politician had said it in Canada during COVID, they would be out of a job. They would be gone. They wouldn't even consider saying it. But you had Democratic politicians who were pushing back so much more. We were told that Maxime Bernier was some sort of extremist in his views on COVID. But when you looked at mainstream Republicans like Rand Paul, who is an MD, a medical doctor, he was always saying things much more aggressively than Maxime Bernier was. So it's interesting, and I would say lamentable, that the confines in Canada are still extremely narrow.
Yeah, and it's tough because I think that there are some aspects of the American political system that I would not want to adopt. For example, I think that the two-party system, while it has its benefits, I think generally speaking, it takes away a lot of voter choice. Now, the practical side of that is that it really hinders the chance of a conservative success in Canada in a way that it doesn't in the United States. But I think your point is incredibly well taken, which is that we in Canada have an Overton window that is in a much different place than it is for the United States as far as what the bounds of acceptable discourse are here.
Yeah, no, certainly. I mean, one of the things, just from a simple analytic point, that I always found really interesting about Trump 2016 was he created the ballot box questions, the referendum questions, out of thin air. Drain the swamp, build the wall. I mean, that was not a thing. I think there were obviously people in states like Texas who were passionate about border security and getting more of a wall built, but these were not national referendum questions.
Yeah, if you're in Ohio, like, why do you care about a wall between Mexico and Arizona?
No, exactly. And yet Trump made those the questions that everybody in America had a strong opinion on, and people passionately fought for them. And he really just, it was like magic conjuring of them all. And I do think there's an opportunity. I mean, the question of, are you a leader or are you a follower? Whether or not you're a left-wing figure or right-wing figure, I would say both Barack Obama and Donald Trump are leaders. And then you find people like both Mitt Romney and Joe Biden are not leaders, for instance, in terms of whether or not they can sort of bring these issues to the fore, take the bull by the horns, almost single-handedly, great feats of individual strength, and do that. And I think Canada can make that happen. I think Pierre Poilievre, during his leadership race, he didn't create things out of thin air, but he saw things that were bubbling on the surface and articulated that stuff that people were feeling, in terms of one of his big refrains about, I'm going to put you back in control of your life, almost in a nonpartisan way, Andrew, because I think I think it applies to so many issues. It's not just one policy issue. This idea that too many different government bodies, or even just gatekeeper elite type people, maybe not government figures, but in other industries, are just trying to tell us how we should live, what choices we should make more. So I think a lot of people are feeling that right now, even if they're not card carrying conservatives. Pierre really picked up on that. I don't know if that's still going to be the case whenever this election is, and whenever Jagmeet pulls the strings on the coalition in 2055 or what have you. But, for now, That's how it is.
Okay, since you bring up Jagmeet Singh, not that I find him to be usually the most useful kind of person to talk about in Canadian politics, but I do just find this running gag that I and some others are doing on Twitter to be quite amusing, which is anytime he tweets about how unconscionable something the Liberals have done is, to point out like the fact that this is the guy who has given the Liberals a blank check and really not gotten anything in return here. And it baffles me to some extent. To some extent it doesn't, but it baffles me to some extent that more people don't see through that.
No, for sure. And I think what's really going on is that the NDP just doesn't have the money to fight an election. The NDP knows that they can't win an election. The NDP has moved back to where it was under leaders like Alexa McDonough, where they are just happy to be the third party or the fourth party. They call themselves the moral conscience of Parliament. Basically, that when there's legislation that isn't considering the issues they care about, they're going to get a couple amendments in committee and a couple tweaks, and then they're going to score victory for that. Jack Layton used to basically own a number of bills that passed and said, I actually made this bill what it is. And there's, I think, some case to that being true in some legislation. But then also Jack Layton realized, I'm actually sick of all of this being this like always third wheel. Let's be winners. And then he got that going to his credit. Tom Mulcair picked up on it. And now the NDP, I think for a number of reasons, has decided, now we don't want to be winners anymore. Let's just be perpetual losers. So Jagmeet's just kind of treading water. He wants that job. Let's be honest, if you leave being federal Liberal leader, conservative leader, there are a lot of interesting job opportunities, corporate positions. That doesn't exist when you're an NDPer. Rachel Notley has just gone back to being opposition leader because there's no other, like, she's a person who has to pay bills. I'm sure she has a mortgage. Andrew Horvath, why was she Ontario NDP leader for so long? What else is she going to do? And now she's mayor of Hamilton because, again, she has to pay her bills. The opportunities for them are just that much more narrow.
Yeah, I don't think, I mean, and Tom Mulcair I know is on CTV every now and then, but I actually have no idea what he does with his life.
He goes on CTV.
Hey, you know what? It's a living, and I don't begrudge anyone doing whatever works for them. But yeah, you are right on that, and I think it's interesting. I mean, I don't support most of what the NDP stands for, but I just, putting on my strategist hat here, I wonder why they gave away so much for so little. Because if I were Jagmeet Singh, I would have held out for one of these big ticket items. Like, they still, even their dental plan that they supposedly exacted from the Liberals, even though Justin Trudeau had already promised it, isn't the dental plan that the NDP really wants, which is basically to extend Medicare to dental care. They didn't do anything to get universal pharmacare, which was another longtime Liberal plan. And again, I don't support these policies, but it's like the worst negotiator in history has to have been Jagmeet Singh.
No, certainly. What did he get out of it? And we have to play this kabuki theater. It's a coalition by any other name. Don't call it a coalition. Obviously,
he didn't even get a cabinet seat out of it, like a token, like throw you in there for something. Nothing.
Well, yeah, that's what I'm talking about. I mean, it's just not working. And I know Jagmeet Singh says, and we can withdraw anytime. But as you pointed out, Andrew, well, okay, if you think Canada is like currently complicit in ongoing genocide or whatever these like really over the top remarks he's making. I mean, if you're just in it for the meme wars, okay, well, that tells us what you're all about here. You just want to tweet for the sake of the RTs. If you're genuine about all of this, well, then you're gonna have to do something about it. And you either do something by getting on the phone to the prime minister and saying, look, I'm gonna collapse this thing unless I get X, Y, Z. And to your point, Andrew, with the details of the dental plan, he's not actually doing that. He's not striking a hard bargain. So what do? I mean, if he wants to play that game of being the moral conscience of Parliament, and I'm just going to like tweet my indignation once a week, well, fine. I guess that's what he's doing. He's doing that job. But if they're serious about affecting policy change and playing their role in Parliament, then yeah, he's certainly got up his game.
Let's turn a little bit here to the year ahead, 2023. Do you think this is going to be an election year federally?
I don't. I think Justin Trudeau wants to run out the clock. It's very interesting that with the interest rate hikes, we're told by some of the major banks that people have hit their trigger points. Now, there's a certain period where when you have a variable rate mortgage, when the rates go up, your actual raw payment is not going up. It's just that the amount of interest and principal skews against you, and you almost get to the point where you're paying 100% interest, but your payment still hasn't gone up. So your daily living is not affected. The trigger rate means, sorry, we're actually going to have to push this rate up, and you're going to be paying more a month. And you could be paying $200, $500, over $1,000 more a month, depending on when you took out your mortgage. There was years like 2019 when Vancouver, Toronto, just crazy bidding wars. And I think a lot of people were over leveraged. And some people, I hope it's not a lot, I don't like saying this, but some people will lose their homes and they're not going to be happy about it. And I think a lot of this is going to be in swing ridings as well. So why would you, if you're Justin Trudeau, want to roll the dice on all of that? Why would you want to go to the polls when suddenly almost 4 weeks after you've started the election, the economy gets really problematic, and there's a good argument to be made that you have partial blame for it.
Yeah, and you had people that were talking about the possibility of a fall election, which I never thought was really likely, like one in 2022, but I thought that the only justification for it would have been if Justin Trudeau was seeing that, we're heading into a recession, we're heading into really bad economic terrain. Let me see if I can just like squeak out a win before things get really bad. Because at a certain point, there's going to have to be accountability. And even the most Teflon, scandal-proof government will have to pay the piper. I mean, voters will not endure a government forever. And I think there's still that prevailing question of whether voters turf Justin Trudeau or Liberal MPs turf Justin Trudeau. And I go back and forth on that. What do you think?
I go back to what happened before Justin Trudeau became prime minister when he abolished the Liberal Senate. And back then, that was held up as this brilliant thing to create independent senators or something. No, what he was doing, it was a really kind of Maoist thing because all of the Liberal senators back in 2014 would have been appointed by Paul Martin, Jean Chrétien, or even a few before then. And these are kind of old guard Liberals who I think we've really seen from former cabinet ministers from that era. They're not happy with the direction of this weird, woke,
No.
leftist Liberal Party. He needed to get rid of those voices. So when we talk about backroom machinations, and look, I'm not this, I don't like playing the Ottawa bubble game. So I get a lot of my backroom calculus wrong because I'm just not interested in keeping score and all of that. But I think the idea of elder statesmen in the Liberal Party coming in to make things happen doesn't really exist with the federal Liberals in the same way it necessarily does with other parties. So this idea that someone's going to force them out and there's factions, that's not to the same degree it was during like the Chrétien Martin fighting years. Trudeau has really, really isolated himself, which has some benefits for him. And I think some negatives for all of this. There's this talking point for years that Jerry Butts is the puppet master and he's running things. And he's been out for actually a couple of years. And Andrew, I've got some very bad news for you, actually. Justin Trudeau is in charge. He is running things.
Yeah, it's funny because I've obviously covered and am going to be covering in a couple of weeks the World Economic Forum. And you always get every now and then the person that thinks that Klaus Schwab is pulling the strings on Justin Trudeau. And I say, no, it's worse than that. Justin Trudeau likes to do this sort of stuff. Justin Trudeau likes these policies. You don't need to tell him to do them.
No, it's a good point. I mean, with the World Economic Forum stuff, I think the big problem with it is it's a bunch of like-minded people who are getting together in a room and they hear these kind of rather elitist ideas disconnected from regular folks, and they're more connected to each other, to the global elite cocktail circuit, than they are to the regular folks on the ground, which is why they get really interested in these bizarre, newfangled ideas that they're doing there. The idea that, to your point, it's not like Klaus Schwab has his compromising intel on all these figures. They're willfully doing it. And that's, I think that's a lot more problematic, actually.
So let's get out of the Ottawa bubble and the Ottawa Palace intrigue then, Anthony. I think we all benefit from being out of that space as much as we can be. What are the big things you're looking out for this year? What do you think are the big stories or the big themes?
Oh, well, economic issues. I mean, nobody knows what's going to happen. Tiff Macklem a year ago said there's not going to be any inflation. There's going to be no need for interest rate hikes. That's his core job. You know that meme, Andrew? You had one job. The meme is like, Tiff Macklem, your one job is to pay attention to interest rates. And he has failed on all that. He doesn't know what's going to happen. So if he doesn't know, nobody knows. And look, this is a very real thing in terms of inflation in people's lives. Folks who were only just scraping by 6 months ago, I don't know what it means to say what happens 6 months later, because they can't just scrape by anymore with the food bank usage rates are rising. And this is very real stuff. I do also wonder to what degree we are going to see a pushback on all the woke stuff. In the United Kingdom, they had a lot of concerns with the transgender issues, that they'd gone too far. You could be like deleted from Twitter for merely saying you support J.K. Rowling or what have you. And now it's totally gone the opposite. They've realized they're in problems. They've temporarily shut down that Tavistock clinic, which was doing gender reassignment surgeries. I think we're just behind them. So something's going to come to a head on that issue. On a related issue, when it comes to kids and woke stuff, here at True North, we've been doing so much coverage on school board issues because people are really concerned about what's going on in public schools and the agendas that are being pushed, the politicization that's happening. And we saw in elections in Vancouver and throughout Ontario, anti woke school board slate trustees, and they did not win for the most part. But I think that's just the beginning. I think it was basically like a beachhead moment, and that'll only continue next year.
Well, and I think it was actually a very important battle for people to get in on, because I find oftentimes conservatives in particular tend to ignore local government. And I don't know why that is. I don't know if it's because they think it's beneath them, or because, a lot of people on the right tend to be more policy minded, and the bigger policies that mostly come across our radar are provincial and federal. But local government is very important. School board's very important. And this has really been the first election I can recall where there's really been an orchestrated effort by the right, and I use that in the broadest sense here, to really get involved there.
No, it's a very good point. And I can think of a number of examples where I see a left-wing individual running for trustee, and I go, this person, they don't have kids. They're not previously interested in these related issues. What's going on? It's pretty obvious what's going on. They're a trustee for one term, and then, oh, they're the city councilor or the MPP next term. So they really see it as a feeder system in the way conservatives typically don't. Kathleen Wynne began her career as a trustee and then became education minister, and of course became premier. And I credit her. She was a parent and she was involved in the school system. So I think she was much more, it made much more sense for her to run for trustee rather than some of these other individuals. But yeah, the left leaning people, they see it as a pipeline. And you're right, conservatives don't as much, but looks like they are now.
So let's talk a little bit about where True North goes from here. And I know we've touched on it a little bit. Obviously, we've got a team that just keeps growing and growing. Like, I can't remember if I've said it on the show before, but I remember when I joined True North in 2018, we didn't really have a team call because our team was, 4 people. So we would just, message each other once a week about what we're working on. And then the calls kept getting longer and longer and longer because we kept having more and more stuff that we're doing, which is a very good problem to have. And I mean, at this point, people ask me, how many do you have? And I'm like, I don't even know how many people work for us anymore, which again is a very good problem to have. But what is it you'd like to see? What's the big challenge, Mr. Vice President, that you'd like to see us tackle?
Well, to really simply answer the first question, where's True North going in 2023? Onward, upward, bigger, better. And it's really exciting because that's certainly happening. And Andrew, you've got a lot of fans up there for a good reason. I mean, you're just doing amazing stuff. You've been really killing it with so much of what you're doing and being on the ground to cover things like the convoy, where whether people support them or oppose them, it's still important to just get the basic facts right. And that's what you did, and that's what True North's been doing. So moving forward, I think the team will be growing. Um, as you know, I've been aware of the metrics of most media companies in Canada in terms of the web traffic they get, the audience they command. And to your point of, why did I want to be involved in True North? One of the reasons is, wow, you got a good thing going on here in terms of a growing audience, what those numbers are, and the space True North fills in the Canadian media landscape, a big space and an increasingly growing one. So we're going to see people doing more things. The shows are just gaining in popularity, which is great. And we're going to be doing more news gathering, more exclusive information. To our point about the school board issue, there are many issues that traditional media companies just aren't interested in exploring as much. They're not putting the work into it. Blacklock's reporter, I think one of the reasons that they've had some success is because they cover House of Commons committees and Senate committees. And you go, well, doesn't everybody cover them? They actually don't anymore. It used to be
And
that,
certainly not the reports and documents.
no, absolutely. And it used to be the case that all the wire agencies and the major outlets would have a person sitting in a committee and watching the whole thing. And that just doesn't happen anymore. I think one reason, because they've ceded the floor to these issues and they're not reporting on the nuts and bolts of what matters to Canadians. And another issue is business metrics. They just don't have the people to do it anymore. So True North is going to be really telling the full story in a way that a lot of media outlets just aren't doing anymore. School board reporting was a traditional thing throughout the 80s and 90s. It's not happening anymore. So we're going to be bringing Canadians both getting the scoops, the exclusives, the voices they need to hear, but also getting on the basic news that it is out there, but a lot of media just aren't telling people about it anymore, either for agenda crafting reasons or for lack of resource reasons.
All right, onward and upward. I look forward to it. Very glad to have you on the team, Anthony Furey, VP of Editorial and Content for True North. Thanks so much, Anthony. Always a pleasure, sir.
Thank you, sir.
That does it for me. We will be back with more of Canada's most irreverent talk show soon enough. This is the Andrew Lawton Show here on True North. Thank you, God bless, and good day to you all.
Thanks for listening to the Andrew Lawton Show. Support the program by donating to True North at www.tnc.news.